The Long Remembering by Poul Anderson. Claire took my arm. "Must you go right away?" she asked. "I'd better," I said. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll bring back a nice fat check, and tomorrow night we'll celebrate." I stroked her cheek. "You haven't gotten much celebration lately, have you?" "It doesn't matter," she said. "It's enough just having you around the place." After a moment when we could not have spoken, "Okay, run along." She stood in the door and smiled at me all the way down the stairs. During my bus ride, I decided for the 1,000th time that I was a lucky fellow in spite of everything. Rennie's house was big and old, the neighborhood somewhat better than ours. When I rang the bell, he admitted me himself, a tall, gray man with tired eyes. "Ah, Mr. Armand," he said gently. "You are punctual. Come in." He led me down the hall to a cluttered living room where books hid the walls. "Sit down," he invited. "Do you care for a drink?" We were alone, I realized. "Thank you. A little wine, if you please." I looked out the windows to the undistinguished sunlight. A car went past, the newest and most blatant model. My leather armchair was solid, comfortable. When I moved, its horsehair stuffing rustled. I needed such assurances of everyday reality around me. Rennie brought in a decanter and poured for us both. The burgundy was pretty good. He sat down opposite me and crossed interminable legs. "You can still back out," he said. "I won't think the worse of you." His half-smile faded. "My subjects don't sign those elaborate legal waivers for nothing. And you're married, aren't you?" I nodded. That was no reason for retreat. Rather, it was my reason for being here. Claire worked, but we had a baby on the way, and as for me, graduate assistants in the chemistry department are not exactly overpaid. Rennie's spectacular experiments in psychophysics had won him a large grant, and he offered good money to volunteers. In a few hours with him, I could earn what would make all the difference to us. Still, "I've never heard of any danger," I said. "You don't send people physically into the past." "No." He looked beyond me. His words came stiff. "But this is such a new thing, full of wild variables. I can't predict how far back you'll go, or what will happen then. Suppose your ancestor has, or had, a bad shock while you're there. What would the effect be on you?" "Why, has anybody had experiences like that?" "Yes. No permanent psychological damage resulted, but some did return terrified and needed days to calm down. Others reported no events that were unpleasant per se, but nevertheless were deeply, unaccountably depressed for a while afterward. Everyone has, at best, felt disoriented at first. You mustn't expect to accomplish much in the next few days, Mr. Armand." "I've been warned, sir, and made arrangements." I buried my gaze in the wine glass. "You should be back to normal within a week. I want you to understand, though, I can promise nothing." "I do." "Very well, then." Rennie smiled and leaned back. "Let's get acquainted. I know little about you except that your psychoprofile indicates you'll be an excellent subject. Is your ancestry French?" I nodded. "From the Dordogne. My parents were over here when I was born because my father worked for the diplomatic corps. I like France, but decided I'd rather be an American." "Well, you won't necessarily find yourself back there," said Rennie. "The races of Europe are so scrambled. I'm going to try to send you across a longer time span than the few generations I've managed hitherto." He sipped. "How well do you know the theory of temporal psychodisplacement?" "Just what I've read in the popular science magazines and such," I admitted. "Let's see, my world line through the space-time continuum goes back farther than my birth. At the point where I was begotten, It connects to those of my parents, and so on for grandparents, as far as the first living cell on Earth, possibly. The mind, the consciousness, whatever you want to call it, seems to be a function of the world line itself, as well as of the individual body. At least, you've found that under the present conditions, the mind can move back to a different part of the line, or scan back. The theorists are still arguing which, and the theologians are claiming that what's involved is actually the soul. Rennie chuckled. Not bad. What's your personal opinion? I don't feel qualified to have any, I said. What's yours, sir? You insist in public you're suspending judgment till more data come in. But surely the pioneer... My voice trailed off in embarrassment. He must have sensed how I admired him, for he said quietly, Please, I've done nothing more than systematize the work of predecessors, from as long ago as Dunn and Rhine, if not farther. I owe a tremendous debt to Mitchell and his colleagues. In fact, what I've done amounts largely to fusing their discoveries in noetics with some new concepts of physics and cosmology, and using modern laboratory equipment to check out the hypotheses that followed. I've wondered, why can't you send me into the future? I asked. I don't know, he replied. I just can't. So far, anyway. None of the various explanations satisfy me. He became the parched professor, maybe as a shield. In spite of the countless news stories you must have seen, Mr. Armand, let me summarize for you the subjective experience you will undergo. Your body will lie unconscious for several hours. Your mind will be in the brain or scanning the brain of some ancestor for the same period of time. But you will not be aware of that, of any separate identity. On arousal, return, you will remember what went on as if that other person had been you. Nothing more, nothing less. It was Faustian enough for me. My heart thuttered. Can we get started soon, please? I begged. His laboratory had once been an upstairs bedroom. I loosened my clothes, took off my shoes, stretched on a couch. A pill I took was merely a tranquilizer, the biofeedback exercise merely to establish the desired brain rhythms. Then the laser-driven induction field took over, and I fell into night. I was Argnak Escaladuan Torkluk, which means he who casts the rope against the horse. But my true name I hold secret from warlocks and the wind ghosts and will not reveal. When my first thin beard sprouted, I got my open name because I lurked near a waterhole till a herd of horses came by, then threw a line around one neck, thus holding the beast till I could cut its throat and drag it home. That was on my journey, which boys make alone. Afterward, we are taken off to a certain place in the dark, and the wind ghosts dance in aurochs hides before us, reindeer antlered, and the first joint of the left middle finger is cut off and given them to eat. More I may not say. When it is over, we are men and can take wives. This had happened, I do not know how long ago. The men do not count time. But I was still in the pride of my youth. Tonight it was a cold pride, for I went by myself with small hope of coming back. Snow gusted across my path as I walked down the hillside. Trees, dwarfish and scattered, talked in a huge noisy wind. Afar sounded a lion's roar. Maybe that was the same lion which had eaten Andutanalok Gargut, when last the fall season had kindled rain-wet leaves. I shuddered and fingered the mother charm in my pouch, for I had no wish to meet a beast with Andutanalok's ghost looking out of its eyes. The storm was waning. I saw low clouds break overhead and stars tremble between sere branches. Still, the dry snow hissed by my ankles and crusted in the fur of my clothing. Still, there was little save darkness to see. I made my way as hunters do, my whole skin feeling what lay around. This was in spite of heavy coat, trousers, and boots, whose leathers should be proof against spear thrusts. But the goblins had more strength in their arms than a man does. Any of them could hurl a stone that would smash my skull like a ripe fruit. And then my body would be left for wolves to devour, and where should my poor gaunt ghost find a home? The wind would harry it through the forests and up over the northern tundra. I bore weapons, 3 flint knives at my belt, several spears in a bundle across my shoulder, a throwing stick in my hand. The foremost spear was tipped with wolf bone to bite the deeper, and Ingmarak, the ghost man, had chanted over it. The rest had keen, fresh-chipped stone points, and my free fingers caressed the great comforting breasts of the mother. Yet my single companion was the wind. Trees thickened when I came down into the valley, mostly scrub oak and willow. At last I had woods around me, and must part underbrush with arms and shins to pass through. Ahead, the river's brawling began to fill the gloom. Our cave seemed very far behind, unclimbably far in the cliffs. Nobody there had forbidden me to go after Evavi Unaroa, my white witch girl, but could they? But all had spoken against it, and none would come along. Ingmarak shook his bald head and blinked dim, rheumy eyes at me. "This is not well, Argnak," he said. "No good can be found in goblin land. Take a new wife." "I only want Evavi Unaroa," I told him. The elders mumbled. Children stared frightened from shadowed corners. What thing possessed me? I did not know myself. I had gotten her only last summer, when my eyes grew suddenly hungry for her, and she smiled back on me. No man had had her before, and her father drove an easy bargain. For everyone else was the least bit afraid of her. That dearest, merriest of creatures ever to walk the earth, and still did not ask to borrow her. This suited me, whether or not it lowered my standing a bit. We could afford that, since I was among the best hunters, and people liked us both. It was only that other men didn't want to take a needless risk. Soapstone lamps guttered and flared. Wind flapped the skins hung on poles before the hollow in the cliff where we sat. The fires gave such warmth that folk wore little clothing, or none. Near the cave mouth was a good store of meat, gloriously ripening. We should have been cheerful. But when I told them I would go into goblin land and fetch Evavi back, fear had walked in and squatted among us. "They have already eaten her," said Vutak Nanavo, the one-eyed man who braided his beard and could smell game half a day's walk into the breeze. "Her and the unborn child, they are eaten, and lest their ghosts do not stay in the goblin bellies but come back here, we would do well to lay another hand-axe under the hearth she used." "Perhaps they have not been eaten," I replied. "It is my weird to go." When I had said this, there was no turning back, and silence dropped from the night. Finally, Ingmarak, the ghost man, rose. "Tomorrow we will make the spells," he said. We did a great deal on that day, and in the twilight, all saw me take a lamp, the twig brushes, and the little pots of paint deep into the cave. I drew myself overcoming the goblins and colored my face. What else went on may not be spoken of. Well, Ingmarak did relate to me at tedious length what I had already known about the goblins. Old stories told how they once held the entire land, till the men came from the direction of winter sunrise and slowly crowded them out. Now the two kinds seldom glimpsed each other, and hardly ever fought. We were afraid to attack them. What unknown powers were theirs? And ourselves had nothing worth their robbery. They flaked tools somewhat differently from us, but no worse, and seemed to have less need of clothes. The river divided our countries, and few ever crossed it from either side. But Evavi had gone there to fetch stones from its bed. They were strong stones in that water, for it flowed from the far north, where Father Mammoth walked the tundra and shook his tusks beneath the heights of the ice. She wanted lucky pebbles to make a necklace for her child when it was born. She went alone because of having secret words to say, carried a spear and a torch against beasts, and was not afraid. When she made no return, I tracked her, and in the trampled snow saw what had happened. A goblin party had stolen her. If she still lived, she was on their side of the water. Now, on my quest, I reached the shore. The stream was broad, a snake of blackness between white banks and icy trees, in spots dully a-shimmer, as if scales caught light. This bottom of the valley was sheltered from the wind, which was falling anyhow, but cold breathed from the currents, and I saw ice floes whirl past. During the day, with proper apologies, I had chopped down a small tree. My axe is not a good weapon, I think, but does make a useful tool. Most branches I had lopped, leaving some which ought to keep me from upsetting and drowning, and one I had made into a rough paddle. I took off my boots and hung them around my neck. The snow bit my feet like teeth. The clouds were black, sundering mountains above me. Northward the air stood clear, and the dead hunters danced in the sky, their many-colored mantles waving and their long spears shaken at the stars. For them I drew a knife and cut off a lock of hair, stood by the river, and said into the dying wind, "I am Argnak Escaladuan Torkluk, a man of the men, who here gives you a piece of his life. For this gift, of course, I ask no return, but know, star hunters, I am bound into Goblin land to fetch back my wife, Evavi Unaroa, the white witch girl, and our child that she bears. For any aid I may receive, I offer a fat part of every kill I make for the rest of my days on earth." The brightnesses flapped huge. The chill gnawed in toward my foot bones. My voice had come out very small and lonely. So, with a grunt, as a man grunts when he spears a boar that may die or may live to slash him apart, I launched my log. At once the river had me. I sped downstream while I drove my paddle into foam and craziness. The waters roared. I was numbed in the feet, numbed in the head. What happened to me seemed to be happening to a stranger far off, while I, the I of my secret name, stood on a high mountain thinking strong thoughts. I thought it was really needless to freeze my feet this way, when by fire and scraping a trunk could be hollowed out for men to sit dry inside and fish or chase marsh fowl. Then my deadened toes bumped on stones. The log grated in shallows. I sprang off and hauled it ashore after me. For a while I sat rubbing life back into my feet with a fox skin. When that was done, I put on my boots again and started into Goblin land, marking well the path I took. We knew where the goblins denned, closer to the river than us on our side. I went at an easy pace, snuffing the almost quiet air for a smoke to guide me. I was somewhat afraid, but not much, because my weird was on me and nothing could change whatever was going to happen. Besides, the whole world had felt not quite real to me since the evening I saw goblin tracks across Evavi's boot prints. It had been as if I were already half a ghost. I do not understand why I should have lost all wariness toward her, I alone among the men. They agreed she was tall and well-shaped, brave of heart, skilled of hand, and free with her laughter. But she had blue eyes and yellow hair like a goblin. Folk did say, to be sure, that of old matings had taken place between the two breeds, so that now and again the light-hued strain appeared in us. But no one alive could remember another such child. Thus, a power clearly dwelt in Evavi Unaroa, and while she gave no reason to suppose it was harmful, Still, nobody was quite sure what might come of coupling with her, and shied off from taking the chance. I, Argnach, had not. My spirit saw that her power was the mother's, and could only be good. Now I knew that it was as well the same which makes a bull elk stand and die for his mates. The racket of a herd, alarmed by something and crashing off through young trees, put that thought in me. A dim, wintry light had begun to steal between the boughs. I spied signs of plentiful game, more than we had on our side of the river, much more. And we were breeding more mouths than men who hunted, boys who fished, women and girls who gathered could readily feed. I came out on an open slope, grassy in summer, which climbed northward to bulk wan across the last stars. A low breeze brought me smoke. My flesh prickled. I was near the goblin haunt. If they were indeed such warlocks as the stories told of, they would soon smite me. I would fall dead, or turn into a worm and be crushed underfoot, or run screaming and foaming into the woods as some have done who were never seen again. But Evavi was yonder, if she lived. Therefore, I made myself into smoke, drifting amidst shadows, curling behind boulders, winding from bush to thicket to tussock, throwing stick in my left hand and foremost spear in my right. The eastern sky had blanched when I saw the goblin cave. It was bigger and wider-mouthed than ours. They did not make a shelter outside and mostly used that like us. Instead, they stayed inside and kept a fire always at the entrance. Ingmarock had told me that in his childhood the men had done the same, but this was no longer needful. The beasts had learned not to approach us. Hereabouts were more beasts than in our country, and they must be bolder. I had supposed the abundance came from goblin spells, raising game out of dawn mists. But as I stood and peered through the branches of a low-sweeping juniper, a very great thought came to me. If they have the power, I whispered to myself, then they should not be afraid of lion or bear. They should not need a fire in front of their home, but they do. Then, perhaps, O star hunters, this is because they do not have the power. Perhaps they are not even such good hunters as the men, and that is the reason there are many animals in their land. I shuddered with the thought. Strength lifted in me. I had no more fear at all. More softly, then, I stole over the last stretch to the goblin lair. An old one was tending the fire. This was the first time I had seen any at close range. The sight was less dreadful than I had awaited. He was much shorter than I, thickly shaped, but would have been as erect had age not stooped and gnarled him. His hair, once tawny, hung grizzled and unkempt past his shoulders, which were still broad, the arms on them still brawny. His head was the strangest part, long, flattened on top, low of brow, eyes nearly lost under great ridges, no chin behind the thin beard. He stamped his feet, beat hands together, puffed frost out of a crag-like nose. Well must he be cold, for his dress was no more than a few hides clumsily lashed to each other and to him, while his feet were bare. He stayed alert, though. When I broke from cover and sped across the last few man-lengths, he yelled and snatched for a club. My spear butt seemed of itself to find the angle of the throwing stick. The cast whirred. The wolf bone struck. The goblin lurched, clutched at the shaft in his belly, fell onto the snow where his blood shouted louder than his pain. I sprang past him to the cave mouth, drew a second spear from my harness, and roared for Evavi. A goblin came out with a spear of his own. Its point was merely fire-hardened. Outreaching him, I stabbed mine in. A third male lifted a hand axe. They don't make the hafted kind. Before I could unlimber a fresh weapon, but also before he could smite, I seized a brand from the fire and thrust. The flame drew a wail from him. He fell backward to escape more. It boiled with naked bodies in there. I dimly glimpsed the squat, ugly women scramble rearward to guard their cubs and clash teeth at me. The goblin men bumbled in half-darkness, crying out, and the knowledge thrilled in me that they were afraid. "Evavi," I called. "Evavi, Argnok is come for you." Through one lost heartbeat, I knew fear again, that her ghost would answer from a goblin mouth. Then she had pushed her way to the front. I looked into eyes like summer's heaven, and tears stung my own. "This way!" I loosed a spear blind into the murk. A goblin yelped. "Run!" I said needlessly. Our flight must have heartened them. They pounded after us, howling and grunting. Evavi's feet paced mine, her hair streamed near my face. They had not taken her clothes, but even through the heavy furs I could see the grace of her. Even then I savored it. Down the slope we dashed into the forest. Soon a deer trail helped us draw farther ahead of pursuit. They could not run as fast as men. Once, when we crossed a glade, a stone whooped past me with more speed than I could have given it. But no spears came close. Breath was harsh and hot in our throats by the time we reached the riverside where my log waited. "Get that launched," I ordered. We could not hope to swim this icy torrent. While she strained at the weight, I leaned my remaining spears against a bowl, none too early. The goblins burst out of crackly, glittery brush. I wounded 2 of them. A third got in arm's length, caught the shaft I had, and wrenched it from me. I drew a knife and slashed him. Someone else stabbed at me, but my leather coat turned the wooden point. Evavi took a spear and jabbed back, hurting the naked creature. The goblins roiled in withdrawal from us. Our log was almost afloat. We waited, gave a last push, straddled it, and were in the river's arms. I looked behind. The goblins hopped about, yelled, shook fists. Whatever fallen tree they had come raiding on was nowhere near, and the current had borne us out of casting range, swiftly bore us around a bend and out of sight. I laughed aloud and dug my paddle deep. Evavi wept. "But you are free," I said. "That is why I weep," she answered. "The earth powers are strong and strange in womankind." "Did they hurt you?" I asked. "No," she said. "One of them I had seen before, watching me from his side. He and a few caught me by surprise and brought me across to their cave. They would not let me go. But they did no harm, did not even mount me. They gave me their best food and crooned gentle, unknown words. Yet I could not go back to you." She wept afresh. I thought that her fair coloring must indeed have made her a lovely sight to the goblins, as she was to me, while her height and features lent wonder, yes, mystery. They must have reckoned it well worth the risk to have her for, what, their mother? I stopped my toil to stroke her hair. "There has been a weird in this," I said. "We were afraid of the goblins because they look so strange. We thought they must command a power." The river hallooed in the first long light of the sun. My paddle wrestled the water again. "But that is not true," I said. "They are poor and awkward folk, slow on their feet and slow in their souls. Our fathers who hunt in the sky on winter nights drove the goblins off, not with spears or axes, I believe, but because they could think more widely and run more swiftly. Thus they could kill more game and raise more children. The goblins must leave or starve. Now we are outgrowing our grounds. When summer comes, I will gather the men and cross the river. We will take those lands too for our own." We struck the shallows on the home side and waded ashore. Evavi clung to me, her teeth clapping in her head. I wanted to make haste, back to the fires before the cave and the victory song I would sing for the men, but a sound drew my gaze back across the water. The goblins had reappeared there. They stood clustered, staring and staring. One of them reached out his arms. He was a goodly ways from me, but I have sharp eyes and saw his tears. Because he also cares for Evely, I will try to spare his life when we cross the river. I came awake. A fluorescent lamp shone pale, for night lay beyond the drawn curtains. Rennie guided me back to the living room and offered his wine. I had spoken no word. "Well," he said at last, when did you go?" "A hell of a long way," I answered, from the dream which still had me. "Yes?" His look smoldered. "I don't know the date. Let the archaeologists figure it out." In a few sentences, I told him what had happened. "My God," he whispered. "The old Stone Age. 20,000 years ago, maybe, when half the northern hemisphere lay under the glacier." He reached out to grip my arm. "You have seen the first true human beings, the Cro-Magnon people, and the last Neanderthal ape-men." "No, wrong," I muttered. "The difference wasn't that big between them. I feel sorry for the Neanderthals. They tried hard. Look, I'm dazed. Can I go home and sleep it off?" "Certainly. Typical reaction. You'll come back tomorrow, won't you? I want to record a full statement from you. Everything you can remember. Everything. Good Lord. I never imagined you'd go so far." He escorted me to the door. "Can you make your way all right?" he asked. "Yes, I'm okay. Okay enough, anyhow." We shook hands. "Good night." His tall form stood black in the yellow-lit doorway. The bus I wanted stopped at the corner within minutes. When I had boarded, it rumbled and whined so that for a moment fear tensed my guts. What monster was this? What alien stenches? Then I remembered I'd inhabited the skin of another man, who was 20,000 years in his grave. That did not at once make the world come real. I walked through a winter wood where elk bugled, while ghosts crowded around me and twittered in my ear. Climbing the stairs in my apartment building restored a measure of solidity. I swung aside an unlocked door and entered our general-purpose room. Claire put down a cigarette, rose from her chair, and came to me. "How are you, darling?" Her tone trembled. "How'd everything go?" "Not too bad. Fantastic, in fact." I braced myself. "Except I'm bushed. Before I tell you, how about some coffee?" Of course. But where did you go, darling?" She dragged me by the hand toward the kitchenette. I considered her. Clean, kindly, a trifle plump, rouged, creamed, girdled, with glasses and carefully waved hair and tobacco stale upon her breath. A face rose before me that was brown from sun and wind, weather-bleached yellow mane, eyes like summer's heaven. I remembered freckles dusted across a nose lifted sooty from the cook fire, and low laughter and work-hardened small hands reaching for me. And I knew what my punishment was for what I had done, and knew it would never end.